Professor, I want to get your thoughts on our current circumstances. As we've noted here, millions of people are on unemployment, out of work, can't find work. The stock market is booming. Interest rates are about zero right now. Have you had a chance to look at Biden's next COVID relief package that he's going to introduce?
Yes, I have looked at it, and I'm somewhere between sad and upset because of it's not so much upset at what it does do. It's mostly upset at what it does not do. It's fearfulness, it's hesitance, it's lack of being up to the scale of the problems we face. So for me, the fact that you're not creating a government jobs program at the end of a year when your unemployment is actually getting worse in the last month or two and looks like that will continue for a while. Yeah. I mean, it's beyond words to me. You know, we have lost trillions of dollars worth of good output that these people could have delivered in the way of goods and services had they had a job. Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you help the people at the bottom in a way that would diminish the inequality of wealth and income? When you have had, by the way, 60, just as an economist, something like 60 to 65 million people applied for unemployment insurance at some point over the last 9 or 10 months. Now, some of them have been unemployed the whole time. Some of them only been unemployed a few weeks. But whether you're unemployed a long time or a short time, remember this. When you're unemployed, for a period, you don't get any money. Then for a period, you get less money. During that time, you use up whatever savings you have. You lean on your husband, your wife, your children, your cousin, your grandpa, and you get from them the little bit they've saved up. You have 60 million, that's a third of our labor force. A third. You have impoverished the working class. You got to deal with that. That's why there are 20 million people who haven't paid their rent and are going to face eviction. That's why other people are behind on their credit cards to the tune of, and on and on and on. You've got to deal with that problem. You've lost more people to death than you lost in World War II. I mean, but you don't do it. Let me remind you, in World War II, the government took over the economy. The government said to the railroads, "You're out. We run the railroads. You're not going to tell us where the railroad cars are, where the locomotives." A socialist named Harry Magdoff, you may know of him. He was the czar of the train system in the United States. We had a rationing system. We told every storekeeper, you can't sell a quart of milk or a pound of coffee or 100 grams of meat to a person unless they have both the money for it and the ration card. If you sell anything to a person who just gives you money, we will arrest you and put you in jail. And how did they distribute the ration cards, the government? To each according to their need. If you had a big family, you got a lot of ration cards. You know where the phrase "to each according to their need" comes? That's a phrase that describes the logic of communism. And everybody supported the rationing system. And we had it for years. And it was designed to make sure that the scarce commodities, consumer goods, didn't just go to people with money, because you couldn't buy it with money. You had to have a ration card. And that was distributed based on need. Goodness! The things that were possible in American history. The reason I'm telling you, if it was possible before, it's possible again.
How is it that we've lost trillions in productivity, yet the stock market is at or near record highs?
That is the particular economic policies that were followed, and I have to say this, by Mr. Obama and by Mr. Trump, with a difference that is not much of a difference. I could tell you something else, but it's not true. I mean, that's what happened. They made a decision, the people who run this country, to handle this crisis above all by what's called in economics monetary policy, by creating a vast new amount of money injecting it into the system and driving down interest rates, as you yourself mentioned a few moments ago, to barely above zero. So let me use simple English so you understand.
Please.
The government says to the private capitalist sector, I am going to give you as much money as you want, and I'm going to charge you nothing for doing it. That's what an interest rate below 1% means. So, do you have a problem, Mr. Businessman or woman, in your business? Are you producing something nobody wants? Are you using a technology that doesn't work? Have you pissed off your workers and so you're having trouble with them? Here's your quickest, easiest, cheapest solution. Come to us. We're the Federal Reserve. We'll give you all the money in the world, and you won't have to pay us interest for none of it. Here's a little factoid. American corporations are deeper in debt now than they have ever been in the history of this country by every metric there is to measure such things. Well, where did all this money given to all these businesses go? Did they hire more people? No, they didn't, partly because of COVID. But there's a bigger reason. If you have 25 million people unemployed, you're not going to be able to sell much because the people don't have any money. And if they had any money, they're very worried about their future, as rightly they should be, and they're holding it back. So there's no point in producing more. You're going to be lucky if you can sell anything. So the money doesn't go into what we call productive investment. It goes into the stock market. The only place you can make money, how? You buy a bunch of stock with what money? Free money that you got from the Federal Reserve. You hold it for 2 months and you sell it at a higher price, the difference being capital gains. And who do you sell it to? Another jack like you, who's doing the same thing by buying that share from you to resell it 2 months later to the next one. And they're all borrowing that free money from the Federal Reserve. This is a classic money-fueled bubble. And you know what happens to those bubbles eventually? They always burst. And boy, is that unpleasant. And if Mr. Biden is really unlucky, it'll burst on his watch. And then he will have prepared the ground for the next Trump.
That's what I'm worried about primarily, because at some point, we're going to vaccinate everyone in the country. At some point, the pandemic is going to end, and policymakers are going to stop sending out $2,000, $1,400 checks. They're going to end the top-ups of unemployment insurance, extensions on unemployment, and we will go back to the pre-COVID economy. Do you think at that point, without that helicopter money sloshing around and propping up the consumer market, do you think that's when we should be afraid a crash would happen?
No, there's even worse. And that is that even if that doesn't happen or before that happens, the helicopter money will stop being what it is now. We have a capitalist system that is on government life support. Here's the joke. The very thing that the conservatives always told us should never happen has been brought to us by the same conservatives. That's why you don't hear so much anymore about how the government should get out of the economy. Because if the government dared get an inch out of the economy, this balloon will blow and it'll zoom around the room just the way we know it does when we let the air out of a balloon. We can't. The Federal Reserve is trapped. It has to keep feeding the habit. It is like a junkie. It is the kind of desperate need that can't have a conversation. You know, a person who's really badly addicted, it's too late. They have to get the next fix. It's just their body, their mind, everything. That's where we are. And that's why you need an intervention that is massive and coordinated and sustained. And none of that is coming from the Biden administration. They think they're going to be able to pull this off. They're wrong. Let's remember, I assume we're all happy that Mr. Trump is ancient history. But he came in promising, like Obama, he was going to bring manufacturing back.
Yeah.
No way. He was going to cut the deficit. It's much worse than when he... After everything he promised, with two exceptions, he did give the business community a tax cut. An amazing achievement, a tax cut in 2017, after the rich people had gotten richer for the previous 4 decades, the 80s, the 90s, the first decade, and the second decade. After all of that, when we had had a massive 40-year redistribution of wealth from the bottom and the middle up, he gives the top a massive tax cut. Only conservatives who have lost their sense of proportion would do that. This is a capitalism that is spinning out of control. Marx's analysis was never that capitalism would end because some enemy from outside would do it in. Capitalism ends because it accumulates problems it cannot solve. We're living that.
What do you believe will be the long-term effects on the labor market caused by this crisis and this pandemic?
Well, this is going to depress people, but, I'm assuming you want the right answer.
This is the depressing part of the show.
We already got through our optimism.
This is the part where I ask questions and make everyone sad.
Right, yeah, she smiles a lot. That's right. Look, part of the reason American wages stopped rising in the 70s, remember the story I told you? Mm-hmm. Well, another part of that story is that basically the collapse of the socialist world, Eastern Europe and Russia on the one hand, and the quote-unquote opening up of China on the other, can be understood in economic terms as a sudden availability of hundreds of millions of workers to capitalism. Those workers had been behind the wall, the Berlin Wall, the Eastern Europe bloc. They had been inside China. Suddenly, the Chinese said, here they are. We delivered to you 1.3 billion Chinese workers. And the Eastern Europeans said to their Western European, here, what you had is a massive increase in the supply of labor. What capitalism does, faced with such an increase, is what you would learn from a textbook. If the supply goes up dramatically, but the demand doesn't, and that's what happened, the wages go down. That's all to make a long story short, we're living in a period where the capitalist calls the game. The buyer of labor power is in the driver's seat because the desperation of these millions of people for jobs forces them, or their political leaders, or their union leaders, or their local politicians to offer them up as cheap laborers. And therefore the employer of expensive labor says, I'm in the wrong place. I got to go to where all these desperados are. And if a number of them do, and boy have they, then the ones that are left with less and less. Here's my dark side, that this COVID pandemic has provided a cover, unintentional, but a cover for a ratcheting down of wages, of working conditions, of standards of living that would not have been politically feasible without the pandemic as the thing to take people's attention away from the long-term economic dilemma that an uncontrolled capitalism is visiting. Look, Americans enjoyed capitalism on the ride up. What they don't understand is that we're not on the ride up anymore. We're on the ride down. The ride up has moved, and it's located, and this is hard for Americans, in the People's Republic of China. And if I had time, I would urge on the Biden administration to stop the repetition of the Trump attack on China. That is a bad policy. That is not going to help the United States, just like what Trump did was no good for the United States at all. The Biden people are making noises that they're going to continue that. I hope that's not true. That These kinds of economic warfare have a nasty habit in human history of sliding into military warfare.
Yeah.
Plus, we're losing. Here's the statistic came out last week. For the year 2020, the economy of the People's Republic of China will have risen by 3 to 4%. Over the same year, the economy of the United States will have shrunk by 3 or 4%. I mean, holy mackerel. It is now predicted that 5, 6, 7 years from now, the Chinese economy as a totality will be producing a larger GDP than we do in the United States. Listen, you've got to come to terms with that. Yelling and screaming, calling names, punishing executives. This is childish. This solves nothing. The Chinese are laughing at us, and rightly so. You have to engage that. The British tried to make sure the United States didn't outpace them. How well did that work out? The United States is a colossus, and Britain is a small comma after the name. And we're now facing the same thing. The British have had a hard time facing their decline. Hopefully the United States can learn and manage it in a better way. But if it doesn't, Britain is the model people should keep in mind.